Moving now to our final speaker, delighted to welcome Alhassan Ibrahim from the James Hutton Institute. Alhassan is the author of Raising Standards for Stakeholder Engagement in Nature-Based Solutions, and he's going to share his top tips on governance and engagement based on 19 European case studies. So over to you, Alhassan.
Okay, thank you very much. I share my screen. Please confirm if you can see it.
Just thinking about it. It's looking promising. Yeah, perfect.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. I'm Alhassan from James Hutton Institute, and one of the key things that I do is always talking about nature-based solutions, looking at how better to mainstream it within governance for policy systems and ensure that it's transformative, can address the various climate and societal challenges, but also it is done within the framework of justice. And so here I'm going to share our experience of working with 19 European case studies and how they engage stakeholders. Because of time, I'd rather urge everyone after here to read our recent deliverable, which addresses this topic posted in the chat. So just to recap, some of the tips that we've learned so far is about ensuring that stakeholder mapping is comprehensive, which will help you know who to engage. Also, it's important to build trust between stakeholders. In addition, it's really useful to know that the stakeholders have different interests. They are diverse, especially when it comes to how they see cost and benefit. At the same time, there's issue of power. There's also the need to be context specific, not to be one size fits all approach, which will not work if we adapt that approach. And finally, one of the key things is to always think about what happens after the project timeline ends. How do you keep engaging stakeholders? And the 19 European project is part of what we call the Merlin projects about mainstreaming ecological restoration. And you can see the map here. They are across different countries. We have those focused on wetlands, those focused on small streams, and those focused on large transboundary rivers. This also, we have, they are within different types of landscapes. So some like you see within like a more urban areas, some within flat plains, and then others within focusing broadly on catchment basis. And in this project, one of the things that the case studies that I showed you needed to do is to first ensure how best to adapt stakeholder engagement and also how best to shape implementation of nature-based solutions with stakeholders, and how to also ensure that the processes, the procedures, the representation, and also the outcome of benefit and cost are fair. So this is the framework or the underlying principle with which we adapted stakeholder engagement. And with using this, we also appreciate the importance of always ensuring that there is acceptance of the initiatives. There is also clear communication about what nature-based solution is. All of these influence the need to adapt stakeholder engagement. And so starting off in the beginning, what we did was first to develop a guideline for stakeholder mapping. And this guideline was framed within the concept or the idea of first establishing the rationale for engaging stakeholders, which is the we see as the building block for engaging stakeholders. And also based on that, then you identify your stakeholders, you decide when the timeline of the NBS project to engage stakeholders, and also defining the means, the pathways to engage the stakeholders. And this, as was mentioned earlier, is also in the publication, the Raising Standards for Stakeholder Engagement. And one of the things that I will share that is that when we developed this concept, one of the key part of it was understanding the different levels with in which stakeholders can be engaged. So using the ladder of stakeholder participation, we have starting off from informing to empowering. And while the desired level is empowering, there is also understanding that stakeholders are different, as I said earlier, being context specific. So different stakeholders will need different levels of engagement and also different platforms of engagement. So the higher the level, the more interactive the engagement level is. And one of the things that by project design was done was to form stakeholder or what we call case study boards. So the case study boards were the main pathways of engaging stakeholders. So each case study had established a board. The numbers vary from case study to case study, and the purpose of the board was to ensure that there is a collaborative approach of implementing and also managing the NBS interventions. And we constantly promoted the need to make engagement active. And while doing that also, we established that framework to constantly monitor and track how case studies were engaging their stakeholders. So we have starting off from with developing a set template. Some of it they use for mapping stakeholders, also developing using the ladder that I showed you earlier to track how stakeholders are being moved from the different levels of engagement. So some started off from, for instance, from being informed and moved through to empowering stage, and also tracking which kind of stakeholders are. We conducted online survey, for instance, that one specifically to the local stakeholders to understand what they think about the interventions within their local area and whether if it meets their expectation and any issues that are emerging. And just so, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we needed to do is that the engagement process also meet the framework of justice. And so if you look at it after going through all the processes, the different tools that we developed, we can say across all the 19 projects, there were around 466 stakeholders that were engaged. And in that, when we map and when we analyze it, we see that more than half were public sector stakeholders and with different levels of influences, but then community groups or local stakeholders seem to be the least stakeholders that were engaged, and also in terms of even how they were able to influence the decisions, they were the least influential. The same when it comes to the procedure of engaging them using the ladder that I showed you earlier, we can see that stakeholders moved from being no engagement to active engagement, but then this also, it were dominated by the public stakeholders, and workshops seem to be one of the most frequent interactive form of engagement. And then an important aspect of it was also tracking how stakeholders see the benefits of the interventions. And the benefit, they seem to be widespread understanding. But then when it comes to cost or the negative effect, there were not that clarity, or stakeholders understood that differently. And that also because it sometimes is shaped by how the stakeholders were engaged and how those NBS benefits were communicated to them. Now, because of time, I'll briefly show you some of the results. These are what the actions that we're taking to engage stakeholders. You can see the public sector stakeholders were really dominant, and with community groups being the least. We also see that there were some considerable engagement of NGOs. That is because of their functions about functions of promoting environmental protection. Now, I move to the case studies that we selected a few case studies as to tell some stories. So we have about 6 case studies. I'm not going to explain which these case studies are, but if you read the deliverable that I share with you, you'll find more detail about that. But then these case studies help us to have those top tips that are highlighted earlier. The main point is that with the dominance of public sector stakeholders, it's always make it them to exert their influence. Sometimes then it becomes difficult to really consider other local stakeholder interests. But then also there is the issue of land ownership, which is a key aspect of it. And landowners sometimes exerted their own power. It's also important to look at the issue of building trust, and some stakeholders use case studies use their existing structures to really be more like the starting point, and through that structure they help to expand and then include new stakeholders in their implementation. The other point, that last 3 point that I'll show you, is the when it comes to the cost, as I mentioned to you earlier. So while project leaders, those who lead the project, they understand the cost, the local communities really did not have much understanding, and this reflects the need to better communicate the benefit of NBS and also the cost, the implications to people, and also understanding that the case studies or the stakeholders have different appreciation. An example is that while we talk about environmental protection, some think about cultural heritage. So this may be undermined, or there will be little appreciation of the importance of that. But if these are not well appreciated, it could lead to some form of resistance. Then there is that challenge about how then do you really sustain engagement over time, particularly beyond project timelines. And in this one too, considering building on existing structures sometimes help, and having clear funding structures, developing plan that, okay, this is the timeline of project implementation, but when the project ends, this is what we were going to do to ensure that the stakeholders are on board and help better manage the project. But also instituting new or connecting it to other new projects helps to better and sustain the engagement of stakeholders. The final point is that in some cases, especially in large landscapes where there's fragmentation, you might need to consider adapt different approaches to engage the different stakeholders within the landscape. And this is what we call about the need to consider contextual factors, especially the issue of land tenure, the issue of culture, and also different governance systems. So sometimes even a simple change of a counselor may influence how the project proceed, or the success of the implementation. All of this needs to be considered when engaging stakeholders. Now, we came out with some recommendations. There are some enablers for you to better adapt stakeholders, stakeholder engagement, for you to better ensure that NBS is just and meets all these ideas of fairness. Then you need all of these enablers. Example is that building stakeholder capacity, building also leveraging the existing institutional systems can all help, but also ensuring there's shared leadership. These were all came out as important factors. But for policymakers, for instance, it's always important to consider that it's costly to engage stakeholders, particularly sustaining it. And so having that kind of funding would help. But always for those who are implementing project project NBS interventions, it's important to develop different approaches to engage stakeholders, especially in a situation whereby some stakeholders are reluctant or don't want to be engaged. Then you need to find different ways, as opposed to thinking that, oh, they don't want to engage, I can do nothing. Sometimes it's about you rather looking for different and better ways to attract or bring them on board. And you can read more on this link. I'll share the slides. There are a lot of resources that you can read. And thank you very much. Happy to chat or discuss more with you.